Hey, welcome back. My guest in this segment is Mike Gorenstein, CEO of Cronos Group, trading on NASDAQ and the TSX under the symbol CRON. Mike, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Mike, let's just get this one little piece of house cleaning out of the way. Obviously Andrew left, and the Citron research report is now, as demonstrated by the market, deemed uncredible, and the guy's choice of weaknesses to address were actually just more demonstrative of his inexperience in the cannabis industry, more so than it was any sort of smoking gun red flag. But just in a single statement, how was that whole experience for you?
I'd say Cronos, we try to take the high road, which is why we got into cannabis in the first place.
I knew you were going to come out with something like that. Great. Recently, you announced a partnership with Ginkgo Bioworks to produce cultured CBDs. Now, I've been following a company that's producing cultured CBDs on the East Coast called Hyacinth that uses genetically modified yeast to create the full range of CBDs and micro CBDs, including THCs. And how is yours different from that, or how is it similar?
Yeah, so I think the concept's similar, and it's actually not the concept of using yeast just as generally called like a vector or a mechanism to create different products is very old. It's insulin is generally created that way. Kombucha, beer, right? This is common. I think the difference, Hyacinth is it's always been a cannabinoid focused company. It's a startup that they had the idea, that's what we're going to go after. Ginkgo is somewhat of a different animal. They're the market leader in terms of DNA printing, and the way that they've approached this has been pretty large scale. So just for background, when we looked at them, why we're like, okay, this is the partner for us. They've raised 430 million USD to date. They've got over 100 PhDs there and a lot of robots, as they say. But the early investors, and all the way up to where they are now, Bill Gates, Cascade, Bayer, who we think knows a few things about agricultural and pharma, Viking Global, General Atlantic. We looked at their other partnerships and clients, and also Bayer, there's a big relationship there. DARPA, which is the Advanced Research Program for the U.S. Department of Defense.
Right.
Ajinomoto, Cargill, ADM, Robertet, and so this is a large company. What they're really doing, if you think overall about, think of a website, and you can take a website and white label it, or you can write it from scratch using HTML as code. What Ginkgo does is they look at the whole world and they say, well, you and I, we're just websites, and the code that's used is DNA.
Right.
So rather than just taking yeast and seeing, can they do this, can they copy a pathway, they're actually overall doing genomic sequencing, figuring out what's the most efficient way to do this, and they are writing base pair by base pair, they're writing the DNA code to produce this efficiently.
Whoa, this sounds like rocket science.
it's science. But look, that's I think the disruption that what they did with the rose industry is what caught our attention. So if you look at the prices of roses and what's happened, roses were very important for fragrance.
Right.
You're extracting terpenes from these huge fields of roses, and they're grown in Ecuador, Colombia, as cheap as possible. And you're looking for that rare compound. It's very similar to cannabis. What you're doing, you're growing flower, and then you're looking to extract something. They went in, they sequenced the rose, they understood which fragrance matters, and since then, if you look at what's happened, the client they have is now able to produce more consistently and in a much more efficient clip everything you need for fragrance.
So has the bottom fallen out of the rose industry in Latin America?
I would say an opportunity is open for Latin America to start cultivating cannabis.
I see. Okay, great. So if this technology is successful, and it sounds like it's going to be, if it's got this level of investment in it, sounds to me like cannabis as an ingredient for things in like beverages, medicines, even vapes is not going to be derived from a plant in the future. It's going to be grown in a biological setting.
Yeah, well, right now it's grown in a biological setting, right? It's just that what you're using is cannabis, what we think of now, to grow the cannabinoids, and this is just a more efficient way of doing it. But yeah, I think that's right.
Without the cannabis plant.
That's right. You know, but think about think about what's happened in the U.S. If you look at some of the vapes, you know, it started off that the premium products, the big differentiator is how do you get the terpenes, and then people discovered, well, wait, we can get food grade terpenes that are the same as cannabis. So you have a lemon haze. The reason that that lemon haze has the lemon scent and flavor is limonene, but the question is, do you have to get limonene from cannabis if it's also present in lemons? So the same thing happens, but you know, that's the big reason we focused on putting up a big indoor facility to have premium flower. You know, we do think that there is still some types of oils that will make sense to come from the plant. You know, it's like fresh squeezed orange juice versus say orange juice from concentrate. But yeah, I think that this is, especially in the pharmaceutical area, but for anything where you need consistency and you're focusing on those discrete cannabinoids, that's where we see it going.
Okay, so the obvious question is this that much cheaper a way to produce cannabinoids than is growing elaborate plants in elaborate greenhouses?
Yeah, so the way, there's a few things to look at. First, just the CapEx of putting up all these facilities from cultivation, extraction is very, very expensive, and especially if you need to do them all around the world.
Right.
But yeah, the way we structured the deal, our equity only is actually given, like their compensation, if they're able to produce at less than $1,000 per kilo of a pure cannabinoid. And that's for each cannabinoid. So, you know, to put that in perspective, if you're cultivating for 1,000 a kilo for flower, you know, let's assume you can do it at 20% THC. So just off the bat, that puts you at 5,000 a kilo.
Right.
Now let's go a step further. If you're extracting it, what's your cannabinoid yield? You know, there are companies that are aspiring to have 90% cannabinoid yield, right? So you're going to start getting up, you know, now getting higher to 6,000. Then, well, what's the cost of processing? 40 or 50 cents a gram, or you know. So, so you start getting up and you're looking at over 10,000 a kilo, you know, aspirationally. So yeah, I think it's a fraction. And that's a minimum floor. That's a level where they're willing to say, we won't even take compensation if we can't do it below that. That's not the target.
Wow. So that implies then that this, this massive build out of cannabis cultivation capacity is really already overdone. If this is the way that we're going to obtain all of the ingredients, X of the premium flower smoking experience, I mean, how big is that market going to be as a percentage of the whole?
You know, I think they're both huge markets. I think the applications will be bigger, but you know, the idea that all of the infrastructure that we're seeing going up was going to actually work. You know, if you weren't able to, if you had infrastructure for say a tomato or you know, cultivating cucumbers, and it wasn't enough to stay alive there, retrofitting it for cannabis, which is going to be just as competitive, you know, I don't think it works. But I'd say, yeah, you could ask the same question, and a lot of people thought, like, how would a Blockbuster store ever be, you know, unnecessary, overbuilt, or irrelevant? This idea of Netflix makes no sense.
Right.
You know.
Okay. So then you've also announced that you're rolling out in Latin America through an affiliate, Agrodia SAS, Colombia's leading agricultural services provider.
Yeah.
So what does that all start with? 207 acres starting, and you're going to be growing outdoors there?
No, so we'll still, we're using greenhouses. These guys are extremely experienced. They've been working on for quite a while. They actually, a lot of the infrastructure came, when you think of cannabis companies now saying, you know, we want to get out of the cultivation business, right, that happened with Dole as well, where Dole sold off their productive assets for flowers, and these guys purchased the infrastructure from Dole. Okay. So they already have a very large operation going, and you know, it's sort of all central. They have the tissue culture, microprop lab, all these different services. So we're leveraging that, but we'll still use greenhouses. And that's, you know, that's the idea. So for flower-based global export, that's what we see as the best platform, I think, in terms of climate, in terms of expertise, in terms of labor costs. You know, we think that Colombia makes a ton of sense, and we think we have the right partners.
Sure. I want to ask your opinion about something that's happening in the marketplace, because you're the other company on NASDAQ now, is Tilray has achieved this absolutely stellar valuation on what appears to me to be a subset of what more mature companies in the space have in terms of operational footprint. Is it your experience that the retail appetite for stocks in the cannabis space on NASDAQ are going to be subject to intensive accumulation by the retail side at this point, as evidenced by what's going on in Tilray right now, and I'm assuming that despite an absence of credibility and effect in the Citron research piece, that it still had an effect. We saw that for a day or two, and I'm assuming it's just a matter of a short period of time till the momentum comes back and everybody says, okay, that was a nothing, let's accumulate Cronos.
I think there's a lot more going on. I think first, given what we're talking about, and if you think about what companies, overall, whether it's strategics or whether it's large institutional investors, what they really place value on, I think the retail market thinks so much about what's your funded capacity. And we've always kind of joked about this, but institutional investors, strategics, they're always asking, well, isn't the compression going to come on the cultivation side? Does it really matter? So that's not really where most of the value is placed. And there was, I think it was Bloomberg that a few months ago did an article to break down percentage of institutional investment. And we were on the NASDAQ, we had the highest, I think the second highest, and I assume certainly now post-Constellation it's going to be Canopy. They were second highest there, they're on the NYSE. I think a lot of it is you're seeing institutional money come in. There certainly is still retail, but that percentage is I think, changing. And I think they value different things. The other part, and this is coincidental, the two companies listed on NASDAQ, we also have sort of, over the last few years, made sure that, to answer the question, what are you going to do about the US? We've had solutions that are fully legal, fully compliant, that we've started setting up, I think, longer than any of the other major LPs. This whole infrastructure in the US that's ready for us. So I think that's another factor that goes in when investors are looking, how are you getting into the largest consumer market? What is your plan of attack? Have you thought this through? How are you going to take your IP that you're telling us is scalable and you're working on? How do you move it to the other markets? What are you doing globally? So I think it's a much different approach of looking at the company, what you're after, rather than just saying, how many kilos can you produce and what's the cost of producing the kilos? There are very few companies in the world I've ever heard of valued that way outside of this industry.
Right. Huh. Okay. So what's the big catalyst in the near term for Cronos Group going out, say 6, 12, 24 months?
You always ask this, and I always it's usually not what you'll expect. Maybe it will be what you expect. I never know what the expectations are, but it could be anything from us going and sequencing DNA and figuring out a way to produce cannabinoids, to other disruptive technology. There's entering new product categories. We look at it as not what's the catalyst in 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, but what is it that sets us up the best for 5 years when you're looking out and you're saying, okay, what is this company worth on bottom line and with a relevant multiple? That's really where we're focused, and we always have been.
Okay, and that's still the bottom line.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right, Mike, we'll leave it there for now. Thanks very much for the update.
All right, thank you.